I'm Emily, 32, sitting at my family's Thanksgiving table in our old Ohio home. The turkey's steaming candles flicker, and my dad, James, carves with a smirk. My sister, brother, stepmom, and cousins chat oblivious to the tension. Dad raises his glass for a toast to success, then looks right at me. "Too bad Emily's still figuring out what that means," he says. Laughter stings, but I smile, gripping my mom's locket, hiding a secret that'll flip this night upside down. Ever had to prove someone wrong when it hurts most? Share where you're watching from below, and maybe hit that subscribe button to see how this unfolds. Sao. The dining room felt smaller as plates of mashed potatoes and green beans made their rounds. I tried to focus on the clink of silverware, the soft glow of candles against the floral wallpaper. Anything to shake off Dad's toast, still burning in my chest. I caught my sister Hannah's eye across the table, her new job at Dad's company, the talk of the night. "Nice work, Hannah," I said, forcing a smile. "You must be thrilled." She beamed, launching into how she'd led a big project. Before I could add anything, Dad's voice cut through like a knife. "Hannah's the real star here, Emily not scraping by like some people." The words hit harder than I expected. Laughter rippled from my cousins, but it wasn't cruel, just careless. My cheeks burned. I wanted to shrink into the tablecloth, disappear into the faded roses stitched across it. I was 16 again, standing in my high school counselor's office, Dad's voice booming that my art projects were a waste of time. "You'll never make it with doodles," he'd said, while I clutched a sketchbook like a lifeline. That memory clawed at me now, sharper with every second I sat here silent. My cousin Audrey, sitting to my left, gave me a quick glance, her brown eyes soft with something like pity. She opened her mouth, then closed it, turning back to her plate. I didn't blame her. Dad had a way of filling a room, his presence heavy like the oak table we'd eaten at since I was a kid. His old watch, a hand-me-down from his father, ticked loudly on his wrist. I'd always noticed it, the way it seemed to count down his patience for me. Tonight, it felt like a metronome to my humiliation. I tried to steady my breathing, my fingers brushing the locket hidden under my sweater. Mom's voice echoed in my mind, her gentle encouragement from years ago when she'd watch me draw for hours. "You're brilliant, Emily," she'd say. "Don't let anyone dim that." But Mom was gone, and Dad's words were all I had now, slicing deeper with every syllable. I wanted to snap back to tell him about the clients I'd landed the late nights building my business. But my throat tightened, and I stayed quiet, the weight of his judgment pinning me down. Hannah kept talking, oblivious, her voice bright as she described her corner office. "I'm so proud to carry on Dad's legacy," she said, glancing at him like he'd hung the moon. Her words twisted something in me. Legacy. Dad's company, his pride, the thing he'd built while dismissing everything I did. I'd spent years proving I was more than his shadow. But here I was, still the afterthought. My fork felt heavy in my hand, the cranberry sauce blurring as I stared at my plate. Audrey nudged my elbow, her voice low. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded, but it was a lie. I wasn't okay. I was unraveling, the room spinning with every laugh, every clink of glass. Dad leaned back in his chair, his smirk wider now, like he'd won something. Maybe he had. Maybe this was his game, keeping me small so he could feel big. But under the table, my fingers tightened around the locket, and a spark of something else flickered. "Not yet," I told myself. "Not yet." I pushed a piece of cornbread around my plate, the butter melting into a greasy smear. The dining room chatter had picked up again, my cousins trading stories about their jobs, their kids. I wanted to join in, to feel like I belonged. So I turned to Clara, my stepmom, sitting stiffly beside Dad. "Your cranberry sauce is amazing," I said, hoping to shift the focus. Clara's face softened, and she started to ask about my freelance work, her voice kind, like she actually cared. I opened my mouth to tell her about the logo I'd designed for a local brewery, but Dad's laugh cut me off. "Freelancing's not a career, Emily. he said, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. You're 32, still playing artist. When are you going to grow up? The words landed like a punch, stealing my breath. I glanced around, expecting someone to say something, anything. But the table stayed quiet, forks scraping plates, eyes fixed on their food. My brother Nathan let out a nervous chuckle, like he was trying to smooth things over. She's fine, Dad, he said, just different. Different. The words stung worse than Dad's jab, like Nathan was picking his side, and it wasn't mine. I dug my nails into my palm, the pain sharp enough to keep me from crumbling. Clara's smile faded, her hands folding tightly in her lap. I saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way she avoided Dad's gaze. She'd been on the receiving end of his sharpness too, I knew that, but her silence now felt like another door closing. I wanted to scream, to tell them all I wasn't some aimless kid chasing dreams. I'd built a business, signed contracts, stayed up until dawn to make it work. But the words stuck in my throat, heavy as the gravy congealing on my plate. My eyes drifted to the old buffet against the wall where Mom's crystal vase sat empty now. She used to fill it with sunflowers, their bright petals spilling over the edge. I could almost hear her laugh, see her hands arranging the stems while she told me I could be anything. That vase was a ghost of her, a reminder of the warmth this house used to hold. Now it was just me sitting in a room full of people who didn't see me. Nathan started talking about his new car, his voice loud like he was desperate to move on. I caught Audrey watching me again, her fork hovering over her peas. She mouthed, "You good." I nodded, but my chest was tight, my pulse hammering. I wasn't good. I was sinking the weight of Dad's words pulling me under. His watch ticked on, relentless each second, marking another moment I let him define me. But under the table, my fingers found the edge of my sweater, twisting the fabric. I wasn't done yet. Clara cleared her throat, trying again. "Emily, tell us about your latest project," she said, her voice softer this time. I started to answer, but Dad waved a hand, dismissing her. "Let's talk about something real," he said, turning to Hannah. "Tell us more about that promotion." Hannah lit up, and the table leaned in, hanging on her every word. I stared at my plate, the cornbread crumbling under my fork. The room felt like it was closing in, every laugh, every glance pushing me further out. I wasn't just invisible. I was the mistake they all tiptoed around. And that realization burned hotter than anything Dad had said, a fire that wouldn't let me stay quiet much longer. Pumpkin pie slices were passed around, the sweet smell mixing with the bitter knot in my stomach. Coffee cups clinked, and the dining room buzzed with small talk, but I was still reeling, my fork idle in my hand. Dad's dismissal of my work, Nathan's half-hearted defense, and Hannah's blind loyalty had left me raw. I tried to focus on the pie's flaky crust, but Dad's voice broke through again, louder now, warmed by wine. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "every family's got its failures. Guess we know who ours is." His eyes locked on mine, and the table went still. "Emily's always been a dreamer, not a doer," he went on. "Dropped out of college, no real job, just floating." The words sliced deeper than before, each one a fresh cut. I felt my throat tighten, my mind flashing to those months I left college to care for Mom, holding her hand through chemo, while Dad was too busy with his company to show up. He'd never once thanked me, never acknowledged the choice I made. Now he was twisting it, making it my shame. My cousin Marcus shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "Hey, Dad, how's the new office coming along?" he asked, his voice tight. I appreciated the effort, but Dad waved him off. "Don't change the subject, Marcus. We're talking about reality here. Emily needs to hear it." My chest burned anger, mixing with a grief I couldn't name. I glanced at the wall, where a faded photo hung me and Dad at my 10th birthday. his arm around me, both of us smiling. That version of him felt like a stranger, now someone I'd lost long before Mom died. Hannah sipped her coffee, her silence louder than words. Clara's hands fidgeted with her napkin, her eyes darting to Dad, then away. No one spoke up. No one pushed back. I wanted to scream, to tell them I wasn't the failure he painted me as. I'd built a business from nothing, worked nights while they slept, turned my art into something real. But the weight of their stares, the way they let his words hang, kept me frozen. My fingers brushed the locket under my sweater. Mom's warmth, a faint anchor. I thought of her hospital bed, her weak smile when I showed her my sketches. "You're going to shine, Emily," she'd whispered. "Don't let him dull you." But here I was, dulling myself, letting Dad's voice drown hers out. Marcus tried again, mumbling about football, but Dad's laugh cut him off. "Come on, let's be honest," he said, his tone sharp. "Emily's never going to measure up." The room felt like it was tilting, the candlelight too bright, the air too thick. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I gripped the edge of my chair nails, digging into the wood. I wanted to run to hide, but something hotter was building inside me, a fury I couldn't swallow anymore. Dad leaned forward, his smirk daring me to respond, and I knew this wasn't just about tonight. This was every year, every slight, every time he made me feel small. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. I stared at the crumbs on my plate, the pumpkin pie untouched its sweetness, mocking the bitterness in my throat. The dining room's hum of conversation had died, leaving only the faint clink of a spoon against a cup. Dad's smirk lingered, his words still echoing in my skull. My hands shook under the table, and I pressed them against my thighs, trying to anchor myself. I wanted to speak, to tell them about the brewery logo that won an award, the clients who trusted me, the business I'd built from sleepless nights. So I tried. I landed a big project last month, I said, my voice thinner than I wanted. Dad snorted, cutting me off before I could finish. "Clients," he said, his tone dripping with scorn. "You're a glorified doodler, Emily. That's not work. That's a hobby." The table stayed silent, a void where support should have been. My chest tightened like the air had been sucked out of the room. I looked to Hannah, hoping for a flicker of sisterhood, but she just stirred her coffee, her lips pursed. "Dad's just being honest," she said finally, her voice cool. "You could try harder, Emily." Her words hit like a betrayal, sharper than Dad's. Hannah, who'd spent our childhood drawing beside me, who knew how hard I'd fought to keep Mom's belief in me alive. Now she was his echo, choosing his side over mine. I felt my eyes burn, but I blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. Nathan shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping the table, avoiding my gaze. Clara's hands were still, her napkin twisted into a knot, her silence another wall between us. My gaze drifted to the chandelier above, its faint hum buzzing in my ears, a sound no one else seemed to notice. It felt like my heartbeat, erratic, trapped. I thought of Mom's sketchbook tucked away in my apartment, filled with her notes in the margins. "Keep going." She'd written once, her handwriting shaky from illness. I'd carried that book through every rejection, every late bill, every doubt. But here in this room, it felt like nothing, like I was nothing. Audrey reached for her glass, her knuckles white, but she didn't speak. My cousin Marcus stared at his plate, his jaw tight. Even Sophia, Nathan's girlfriend, looked uncomfortable, her eyes flicking to him as if begging him to step in, but no one did. The silence was louder than Dad's voice, a collective agreement that I was the failure he said I was. I wanted to run, to leave this house and its ghosts, but my legs felt heavy, glued to the chair. Dad leaned back, sipping his wine, his watch glinting under the light. "You've got to face facts, Emily," he said, his voice almost casual now, like he was commenting on the weather. "You're not cut out for anything real." The words landed like a final blow, each one carving out a piece of me. My fingers found the locket again, but even Mom's memory couldn't steady me now. The room spun the faces around me, blurring into a haze of judgment. I was alone more than I'd ever been, and the weight of it was crushing, pushing me toward a breaking point I couldn't see past. The plates were mostly cleared now, just smears of gravy and pie crust left behind. The dining room felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with the weight of Dad's last words. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might crack my ribs. I stared at the tablecloth, its faded roses blurring as I fought to breathe. Everyone was quiet, the kind of silence that screams louder than words. My fingers gripped the edge of my chair, the wood cool against my palms. But inside, I was burning a fire fed by years of being torn down. Dad set his wine glass down, the clink sharp in the stillness. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with something cruel. "Emily," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "you're a complete failure. You'll never amount to anything." The words hit like a sledgehammer, shattering what little control I had left. The room froze. Audrey's soft gasp was the only sound, her fork hovering midair. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. Hannah stared at her lap, her fingers twisting her napkin. Clara's face was pale, her lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't. My mind spun a flood of memories crashing over me. Dad's voice at my high school art show calling my paintings childish. His sigh when I said I was starting my own business, like I disappointed him just by trying. Every moment he made me feel small, unworthy, piled up until I couldn't breathe under their weight. I clutched the locket under my sweater, Mom's voice faint but steady in my head. "You're enough, Emily. You've always been enough." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. I looked up, meeting Dad's gaze. His smirk faltered for a split second, like he sensed something shifting. My hands trembled, but not from fear anymore. It was rage, raw and alive, pulsing through me. I thought of the late nights, the contracts I'd signed, the quiet moves I'd made to build something he'd never see coming. I wanted to scream it all, to throw it in his face, but I held back, my breath shallow. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in every pair of eyes, a weight I couldn't shake. Marcus coughed, his chair creaking as he shifted. Sophia whispered something to Nathan, her voice too low to catch, but her eyes were wide, unsettled. The tension was suffocating, a storm about to break. I felt the contract in my purse tucked against my side, its pages heavy with the truth I'd been carrying for weeks. My secret, my weapon, the thing that could turn this moment upside down. But I wasn't ready yet. Not quite. The pain was too raw, the wound too fresh. I needed one more heartbeat, one more breath to decide if I could really do this. My chest heaved, my vision narrowing to Dad's face, his smug certainty that he'd won. The locket burned against my skin, Mom's strength seeping into me. I wasn't the failure he saw. I was something else, something he'd never understood. And as the silence stretched taut as a wire, I felt the first crack in my restraint, a spark that could ignite everything. The room held its breath, and so did I, teetering on the edge of something unstoppable. The air in the dining room was heavy, like a storm about to break. My pulse thundered Dad's words, still ringing a cruel echo that wouldn't fade. I felt every gaze sharp as needles pinning me to my seat. My fingers brushed the purse at my side, The contract inside it, a silent promise, but I couldn't move yet. The moment hung fragile, ready to shatter. Then I stood my chair, scraping the floor, the sound slicing through the silence. My voice was steady, though my insides churned. "Funny, Dad," I said, "because I bought your company last week." The room gasped a collective intake of breath. Dad's fork clattered to his plate, his face draining of color. Hannah's eyes widened, her coffee cup frozen midair. What she whispered like she couldn't process it. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her rings glinting in the candlelight. I slid the contract across the table, its crisp pages stark against the crumpled tablecloth. The letterhead bore my company's logo, a design I'd spent months perfecting, now a symbol of everything Dad couldn't take from me. His eyes locked on the paper, disbelief twisting his features. "This is a joke," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying him. I didn't flinch. "No joke," I said, my tone cold. "I own it. Every share, every decision. You work for me now." The words felt like a release, a blade I'd been sharpening for years. Marcus let out a low whistle, his grin barely hidden. Audrey's jaw dropped, her napkin slipping to the floor. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes darting between me and Nathan, who sat rigid, his fists clenched. Dad grabbed the contract, his hands shaking as he scanned the pages. "This can't be real," he muttered, his voice rising. You did this." His disbelief was a knife twisting deeper because it proved he'd never seen me. Not really. I'd spent years building my business, outbidding competitors, securing loans, all in secret, while he called me a failure. Now the truth was bare, and it burned. Hannah's face crumpled, her loyalty to Dad crumbling. "How could you?" she said, her voice sharp with betrayal, like I'd stolen something from her. Nathan finally spoke, his voice low. "Emily, what the hell?" he said, his eyes accusing, like I'd crossed a line he couldn't forgive. Clara's silence was deafening, her gaze fixed on the table as if she could will the moment away. The room spun, the weight of their shock crashing over me. I'd dreamed of this, of flipping the script, but now it felt like standing on a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. Every face held a different judgment, disbelief, anger, awe, and I was drowning in it. My heart raced, but a hollow ache spread through me. I'd exposed the truth, laid bare my power, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss, like I'd broken something I couldn't fix. Dad's eyes met mine, not with rage, but with something worse, fear. He saw me now, but it was too late. The contract lay between us, undeniable, and I stood there trembling, caught in the wreckage of a moment I couldn't take back, with no way forward and no way out. The next morning, I stepped into Dad's company office in Cleveland, the glass doors hissing shut behind me. The lobby gleamed, all polished marble and sharp angles, but it felt colder than I'd imagined. My heels clicked on the floor, each step a reminder of the contract I'd slid across the table last night. The memory of Dad's pale face, Hannah's betrayal, Nathan's accusation, they churned in my gut, but I pushed them down. I was here to take control, to make this real. I adjusted my blazer, Mom's locket tucked beneath my collar, and headed for the boardroom. Zoe, my assistant, met me at the elevator, her tablet glowing with schedules. "You ready, boss?" she asked, her grin half teasing, half proud. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. The boardroom was sleek, a long table surrounded by men and women in suits, their eyes sizing me up. I'd bought the company, saved it from collapse, but I was still the outsider here, the artist they didn't expect. I took a breath and started. "Good morning," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm Emily, your new owner. Let's talk about the future." I laid out my plan: streamline operations, invest in new tech, keep the core staff. But when I got to Dad's role, my throat tightened. I could have fired him, stripped him of everything. Instead, I said, "James will stay on as a consultant. His experience is valuable, but I'm leading now." The board murmured, some nodding, others exchanging glances. I saw Dad's old desk through the glass wall, a photo of his first company truck still framed on it. I'd chosen to keep it a nod to his past, but also a reminder that this was mine now. Zoe slid me a folder with financials, her pen tapping lightly. "You're killing it," she whispered. I managed a small smile, but inside I was wrestling. Part of me wanted to burn it all down, to erase Dad's legacy and start fresh. But Mom's voice echoed soft and firm. "Build, Emily, don't destroy." She'd believed in me even when I doubted myself. Keeping Dad on was my way of honoring her, of proving I could rise without sinking to his level. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Hannah. "You betrayed us," it read. "You're no better than him." The words stung sharper because they came from her. She'd always been Dad's shadow, but I'd hoped she'd see me differently now. I shoved the phone away, focusing on the board's questions. They pushed back on my tech investments, citing costs. I countered with projections, my voice growing firmer. I'd spent years preparing for this, studying markets, learning what Dad never taught me. As the meeting wrapped, Zoe leaned in. "You're a natural," she said, her eyes bright. I wasn't so sure. The weight of the room, the company, the family, it pressed down, threatening to crack my resolve. But I stood taller, my fingers brushing the locket. I was done being small. This was my first step, not just to claim what I'd earned, but to show myself I could carry it. The boardroom doors opened, and I walked out. My heart racing, with a quiet, growing strength, ready to face whatever came next. I left the boardroom, my pulse still racing, and headed to my apartment for the family meeting I'd called. The Cleveland skyline glittered through my living room window, but inside, the air was thick with tension. Nathan, Clara, Audrey, and Marcus sat on my thrift store couch, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. I stood by the coffee table, my mug painted with Mom's favorite daisies catching the lamplight. I'd spent the morning claiming Dad's company, but this facing them was harder. I took a breath and started. I didn't just buy the company to win, I said. I saved it. Dad was running it into the ground. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "You're saying Dad failed," he snapped. "That's rich, Emily." His words stung, but I held my ground. I pulled out a folder, financial reports I'd dug up months ago. "Losses for 3 years," I said, sliding it toward him. "I bought it to keep it alive." Clara's gaze softened, her fingers tracing the edge of her scarf. She nodded slightly, like she'd suspected as much. Audrey leaned forward, her voice quiet. "That took guts, Emily," she said. "I'm proud of you." Her words warmed me, a flicker of the connection I'd craved at Thanksgiving. But Nathan wasn't swayed. "You went behind our backs," he said, his voice low. "You're tearing us apart." His accusation hit like a slap, stirring the old fear that I was the family's fracture. I thought of Mom, how she'd mend our fights with a laugh, a hug. I wanted to be that bridge, but I wasn't her. I was me, and I was done apologizing. I sat down, leveling my gaze at Nathan. "I did what I had to," I said. "Not to hurt you, but to build something real. You can hate me, but I'm not backing down." My voice was calm, but inside, I was steadying myself against a tide of doubt. Had I gone too far? Could I carry this without losing them? Clara spoke up, her voice shaky. "I knew things were bad," she said. "James hid it, but I saw the late-night calls, the stress. You did what he couldn't, Emily." Her words were a lifeline, unexpected and raw. I glanced at the mug, its daisies bright against the chipped rim. Mom had painted it years ago, a gift for my first apartment. It reminded me why I was here, not just to prove Dad wrong, but to prove myself right. Marcus shifted his grin, breaking the tension. "Gotta say, Emily, you're a badass," he said. I almost laughed, the knot in my chest loosening just a fraction. But Nathan stood his chair, scraping the floor. "This isn't over," he said, storming out, Sophia trailing him with an apologetic glance. The door clicked shut and the room fell quiet. I felt the weight of his absence, the rift I'd widened. Yet something else stirred, a clarity I hadn't known I could claim. I looked at Clara, Audrey, and Marcus, their faces open, waiting. I didn't need everyone's approval. I needed my own. I picked up the mug, its warmth steadying my hands. "Let's move forward," I said, my voice soft but sure. The words weren't loud, but they carried a strength I'd earned. I set the mug down, its daisies catching the light, and met their eyes. No one spoke, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was mine, and for the first time, I owned it completely. 2 weeks had passed since I claimed the company, and the annual holiday party was in full swing at a downtown Cleveland hotel. The ballroom sparkled with string lights, tables draped in red and gold. I stood by a tall window, the city's glow soft against the glass, my navy dress feeling too tight for the nerves coiling inside me. Staff mingled their laughter, mixing with the jazz band's hum, but I was waiting for Dad. Zoe, my assistant, weaved through the crowd, her silver earrings catching the light. "He's here," she whispered, nodding toward the entrance. Dad walked in his suit, crisp, but his shoulders slouched, a shadow of the man who'd ruled every room. He spotted me and approached, his steps slow like he was crossing a minefield. "Emily," he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the music. "I owe you an apology. I underestimated you." His words hit me like a cold wind, unexpected and sharp. I searched his face for the smirk, the catch, but found only a tired man, his eyes heavy with something like regret. I knotted my throat tight. "Thank you," I said, but my tone was firm. "I'm setting boundaries now. You're welcome here, but this is my company." He flinched, just a flicker, then nodded back, his hands slipping into his pockets. The moment felt fragile, like a glass ornament ready to shatter. I wanted to believe him, to bridge the years of distance, but the scars he'd left weren't so easily smoothed. Mom's locket rested against my chest, a quiet reminder to hold my ground. Zoe lingered nearby, pretending to check her phone, but I caught her glance, warm and steady. She'd told me earlier about her own fight to prove her parents wrong, how she'd left home at 19 to build her life. "You're doing it," she'd said, and I clung to that now. The ballroom's chandelier glowed above, its light softer than the one at home, but still a mirror to that night, the dinner, where everything broke open. I wondered if Dad saw it too, if he felt the echo of his own words. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a text from Hannah. "I'm not coming," it read. "I'm looking for a new job. Good luck with Dad's mess." The words stung, not just for their bite, but for what they meant. Hannah was pulling away, choosing her pride over us. I slipped the phone back, my chest aching. I'd saved the company, taken control, but the cost was piling up, fractures I hadn't foreseen. The band played on a slow melody that felt too gentle for the storm inside me. Dad turned to greet an old colleague, his smile forced, and I stood there, the party swirling around me. His apology was a crack in the wall between us, but it didn't heal the years of doubt he'd sown. I felt the weight of every choice I'd made, the eyes of the staff watching me, waiting for me to prove I belonged. The city lights blurred through the window, and I froze, caught in a moment where triumph and loss tangled, leaving me raw, unsure if I'd ever find solid ground again. The holiday party buzzed on, glasses clinking as the jazz band shifted to a brighter tune. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands with staff, my smile practiced but thin. Dad's apology lingered like a bruised tender, and unresolved. I'd promoted Zoe to operations lead earlier that day, her sharp ideas already reshaping the office. The staff respected me some, even thanked me for saving their jobs, but whispers followed me, two old loyalists who saw me as the usurper, not the savior. I kept my chin up, ignoring the sidelong glances. Back at my apartment that evening, I stood at my kitchen counter, a single bulb casting shadows on the tile. Nathan's text glowed on my phone. "You've changed everything, Emily. Not sure I can forgive that." His words carved a hollow space in me. I'd expected anger, but this quiet rejection felt heavier, like losing him all over again. I set the phone down, my fingers brushing a thank you note I'd found in my office drawer. A junior employee had written it, her neat script, praising my vision. It was small, but it steadied me. Clara's visit came the next afternoon unannounced. She sat on my couch, her coat still buttoned, her eyes tracing the hardwood floor. "I made mistakes with James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw him falter, watched the company slip, but I stayed quiet." "You didn't?" Her admission caught me off guard, a crack in her polished facade. I realized she wasn't just talking about the business, she was offering me something, a fragile alliance forged in shared scars. I poured her tea, the steam curling between us. "Why tell me now?" I asked. She looked up, her gaze steady. "Because you're stronger than I was," she said. "I don't want to lose you too." Her words were a gift, but they carried a weight I wasn't ready for. I thought of Hannah, her absence at the party, her job search, a wall I couldn't climb. Nathan's silence. The family I'd tried to hold together was slipping through my fingers, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. Sophia's voice broke the quiet later over the phone. She'd left Nathan at a diner, frustrated by his loyalty to Dad. "I'm rooting for you, Emily," she said. "You're doing what I wish I could." Her support was a spark, but it couldn't fill the void. I walked to my window, the city's pulse faint below. I'd reshaped the company, earned respect, even Dad's grudging acknowledgement. But the cost was etched in every text, every empty seat, every unspoken word. I sank onto the couch, Clara's tea still warm on the table. The note from the employee lay beside it, its words blurring as my eyes stung. I'd fought for this, for me, for Mom's belief in me. But now, with the dust settling, I saw the fractures I'd caused, the ones I couldn't mend. The room was still, the city's hum distant, and I sat there caught in a quiet ache, wondering if I'd won the battle, only to lose the people I'd once called home. Early December light filtered through the bare trees, casting long shadows across Mom's old garden behind the family home. I sat on a weathered bench, the wood rough under my palms, surrounded by overgrown rose bushes and tangled ivy. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and frost. I pulled my scarf tighter, a sketchbook open in my lap, my pencil scratching soft lines, a habit I'd let slip under Dad's criticism. The quiet felt like a gift, a pause after weeks of chaos, and I let myself breathe it in. I sketched the garden's arch, its iron frame rusted but standing firm. My mind wandered to the company now humming under my changes, and to the family still fractured, but not beyond repair. I'd been carrying so much Dad's apology, Hannah's absence, Nathan's anger, Clara's unexpected trust. Each weighed differently, but here in this forgotten corner, they felt lighter, like stones I could set down. My fingers paused, the pencil hovering. I wasn't the girl Dad had called a failure anymore. I was something new, forged in choices I'd made alone. Audrey's footsteps crunched on the gravel path, her coat buttoned against the chill. She sat beside me, her breath clouding in the air. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up at Thanksgiving," she said, her voice low. I wanted to, but I froze. I looked at her, her eyes earnest, and felt a warmth I hadn't expected. "It's okay," I said. "You're here now." She smiled, pulling her knees up, and asked about my drawing. I showed her the arch, its lines imperfect but honest, and she nodded like she saw more than the sketch. A cardinal landed on a nearby branch, its red feathers bright against the gray. Mom used to call them her lucky birds, saying they carried messages from the heart. I hadn't believed in signs since she died, but today, it felt like her whispering that I was on the right path. I told Audrey about my plans, not just for the company, but for me, maybe taking a painting class traveling somewhere new. She listened, her quiet presence a balm, and shared her own dream of opening a bakery, her voice shy but alive. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Nathan. "Can we talk soon?" it read. No anger, just a question. I didn't reply, not yet, but the message settled in me, a small bridge I wasn't ready to cross, but could see clearly now. The garden felt like a sanctuary, its neglect mirroring my own healing, messy, uneven, but growing. I closed the sketchbook, my fingers brushing the cover, and looked at the cardinal still perched, watching. For the first time in years, I felt like I could rest, like the world could wait just a little longer. The garden's chill seeped into my bones, but I stayed on the bench, Audrey beside me, her presence a quiet anchor. I tucked the sketchbook away, my hands brushing the worn leather cover, and looked out at the frost-tipped grass. The cardinal had flown off, leaving the branch swaying gently. I felt a shift inside, like a tide settling after a storm. Nathan's text still sat unanswered in my pocket, a door I'd open soon, but not now. This moment was for me, for the woman I was becoming, not the one I'd been. I stood, my boots sinking into the soft earth, and walked to the garden's edge, where a stone path wound toward the house. Audrey followed her steps light. "You're different now," she said, not looking at me. "Stronger." I didn't answer, but her words settled deep, like seeds finding soil. I thought of the company, the late nights I'd spent proving I could lead, and the families, some still distant, others drawing closer. I'd carried their judgments for so long, but here in the fading light, they felt like shadows I could step through. At a small diner that evening, I met Nathan, his face guarded but softer than before. Sophia sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm, a silent nudge toward peace. We ordered coffee, the cup steaming between us, and Nathan spoke first. "I was wrong to shut you out," he said, his voice low. "Dad messed up, but so did I." I listened, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup, the warmth grounding me. "I don't need you to choose me," I said. "I just need you to see me." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I felt he did. The jukebox in the corner hummed, playing a soft tune Mom used to hum while cooking. It wasn't loud, but it wrapped around me like her arms had years ago. I didn't cry, didn't need to. The ache was still there, but it was quieter now, less like a wound and more like a memory. Sophia smiled, her voice gentle. "You're building something real, Emily," she said. "Keep going." Her words were simple, but they carried weight, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Back home, I stood by my window, the city's lights a soft blur. Clara had texted asking to help with a company project, her words tentative but earnest. I replied, welcoming her, feeling a bridge form where I'd expected only ruins. I thought of Mom, how she'd find joy in small things, a song, a laugh, a shared glance. I was learning that too, finding peace not in winning, but in choosing to move forward. I sat on my couch, the room still, and let out a slow breath, the quiet wrapping around me, like a promise I could finally keep. Christmas Eve, Emily 4, settled over my Cleveland apartment, the soft glow of string lights wrapping the room in warmth. I'd hung simple decorations, glass bulbs, a few pine sprigs, nothing grand, but enough to feel like home. The air smelled of cedar and the cookies I'd baked a recipe I'd found in Mom's old notebook. I stood by the window, the city quiet below, and felt a stillness I hadn't known in years. Tonight, I was hosting a small gathering: Dad, Clara, Nathan, Sophia, Audrey, and Marcus. Not everyone, but enough to start again. I set the table plain white plates and mismatched napkins, my hands steady as I arranged the silverware. The company was thriving, my changes taking root, but this moment wasn't about that. It was about the people I'd chosen to keep close despite everything. I thought of Hannah, who'd sent a card but stayed away, her note short but kind. A step, not a leap, and I was okay with that. Healing wasn't a race. Dad arrived first, his coat dusted with snow. He looked smaller somehow, his smile hesitant as he handed me a bottle of wine. "Thanks for having me, Emily," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. I nodded, taking the bottle, and gestured to the couch. Clara followed, her scarf bright against her dark coat, her eyes warm. "We've got a lot to celebrate," she said, and I knew she meant more than the holiday. Nathan and Sophia came next, their laughter spilling in from the hallway. Nathan hugged me, a quick squeeze that said more than words. Sophia carried a tray of her mom's pecan bars, her grin infectious. Audrey and Marcus trailed in, bickering over who'd parked worse, their ease lightening the room. I watched them settle in, their voices mingling, and felt a quiet pride. I'd built this moment, not just the company, but this fragile, imperfect circle of family. We sat around the table, the cookies passed between us, crumbs scattering. I didn't need speeches or grand gestures. I just wanted this laughter, shared glances, the clink of glasses. I thought of the nights I'd spent alone, doubting I could ever mend what broke at Thanksgiving. But here I was, not whole, but closer. I sipped my wine, the warmth spreading, and looked at the lights twinkling on my small tree. They weren't perfect, some flickering, but they held. Like me. I stood to refill the water pitcher, my steps light on the hardwood. The room hummed behind me, a soft chaos of stories and jokes. I paused by the counter, my fingers brushing the edge of a photo I'd framed, a snapshot of Mom laughing, her hair loose in the wind. I didn't need to carry her pain anymore, or Dad's. I was carrying myself now, and that was enough. I turned back to the table, the voices calling me home, and let out a slow, quiet breath, ready for whatever came next. The evening unfolded, plates emptying as stories flowed. I leaned back in my chair, the flicker of candlelight dancing across the table. Dad tried to steer the conversation, boasting about an old deal, his voice slipping into its familiar swagger. I caught Nathan's eye, a shared glance that held years of knowing. I spoke up, my tone even. "That's not how it happened, Dad," I said. "You taught me to own my work, and I'm doing that now." He paused, then nodded, the room holding its breath. It wasn't a fight, just a line drawn, and it felt right. Clara chimed in, her voice bright, suggesting a company charity drive for spring. "I'm in," I said, already picturing the impact. Audrey mentioned her art school application, her cheeks flushed with hope. "I'll be your first fan," I told her, meaning it. Marcus teased her, lightening the mood, while Sophia shared plans for a community garden. Their dreams wove together, a tapestry I was part of, not apart from. I didn't need to be the loudest voice, just one that mattered. Later, I cleared the table, stacking plates in the sink. The chatter faded to a hum, and I stood alone for a moment, the apartment quiet, save for the soft crackle of the radiator. I thought of the girl I'd been shrinking under Dad's judgment, carrying his words like chains. I'd spent so long fighting to prove him wrong, but the real fight was proving myself right. Mom's belief had carried me, but it was my own choices, hard, messy mind, that brought me here. I didn't need his approval anymore, or anyone's. I needed my own, And I had it. I hung a new ornament on the tree, a small silver key, its edges catching the light. It wasn't just for the company I'd claimed, but for the doors I'd opened in myself. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing pain. It was about choosing to carry it differently lighter. I forgave Dad not for him, but for me, so I could walk free. Strength I'd learned wasn't in being unbreakable, but in piecing yourself back together, stitch by stitch, until the seams were your story. The others joined me by the tree, their faces soft in the glow. We didn't fix everything tonight, but we started. Family isn't perfect. It's the choice to show up to try again. I looked at them, Dad quieter now. Clara finding her voice. Nathan learning to listen, and the others each carrying their own weight. We were enough, just as we were. I stepped back, the key ornament swaying gently, and felt a calm settle deep, a root that would hold no matter what came. What's a moment that made you choose yourself even when it was hard? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated, maybe give it a like, subscribe, or share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding your own light and carrying it forward. Good night.